So thank you everybody for being here this evening for this very special speaker series event tonight. We're glad you're here. And so my name is Cynthia Cutting and I'm from the Museum of the White Mountains, and Rebecca Enman, the Assistant Director of the Museum of the White Mountains, is here today. The real Rebecca Enman is here and making it all work for us. So thanks so much to her for being here this evening. And thank you to members who are here with us this evening. Raise your hand if you're a member of the museum. Yeah, see all those? Yeah, yay! Like all those hands in the air. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting us. We really value your not only your membership dollars, but just your presence and your belief in the work that we do. It's very important to us. Thank you. To those of you who are not members yet, we invite you to join. It's really easy. You can do it online from our website, and we would love to have you as part of this wonderful group that is interested in all things to do with the White Mountains. So we'd love to have you in the group. And a big thank you to New Hampshire Humanities for supporting the speaker series for this entire summer. We're very grateful to have been able to gather together such a wonderful group of speakers here. And be able to present via Zoom, collecting people from all over the country for each of our talks. It's really expanded our audience. So we're really grateful to New Hampshire Humanities for believing in us and making it happen. So thank you. And thank you to our advisory council. We have many of our advisors are with us this evening. Thank you to each and every one of you. Your voice, your support, your guidance has been so instrumental in moving the museum forward and adding in new dimensions and being creative about future exhibitions. It's just been so much a delight to have you at our elbows as we do the work. Very important to us. And it's supposed to special to talk about advisors this evening because our speaker has been an advisor for the museum since the beginning and is our current chair of our advisory council. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Becky Moore is a visiting scholar for and holds a Ph.D. in history from Brown University and continues to work with honor students there. She's been an amazing researcher and historian and supporter of many organizations. But for the museum, we have been so lucky to have her as our trusted advisor. She has been a staunch supporter with bringing a wealth of knowledge about this region's history. And during my time as director here, Becky has been a constant voice in my ear, a supportive voice, helping me through the different challenges and bringing in so many great ideas. And so my personal thanks to Becky for presenting this talk tonight, but also for being such a wonderful help to me at the museum. So we're really excited to have Becky talking about, she always brings this wonderful researched angle to our exhibition speaker series, and it's so exciting to have her fresh approach to to a historical piece of a story that we haven't seen yet. So I'm really excited that Becky's with us this evening. Thank you, Becky. So excited that you're here.
Good evening. I'm Becky Moore, and as always, I want to thank Plymouth State University and the Museum of the White Mountains for inviting me to participate in their ongoing exploration of the White Mountain region through interdisciplinary exhibitions, lectures, and colloquia. Since Zoom is no substitute for gathering in the museum itself, I hope that many of you have been able to get there to see the wayfinding exhibition on display now. Adam Apt, Cynthia Cutting, and David Gavatsky are to be commended for bringing together such a remarkable collection of artifacts and objects that relate to wayfinding in the mountainous terrain of northern New Hampshire. These two manuscript maps on the screen, both on tan paper, and written with brown ink, show roughly the same area of the White Mountains, with many of the same grants from the state and purchases from individuals depicted. Both maps identify the summit of Mount Washington here and here, but they place it in different purchases here and here. The survey on the left, signed and dated 1859 and 1860 by George W.M. Pittman of Bartlett, New Hampshire, places the summit of Mount Washington in Thompson and Meserve's purchase. The survey on the right, unsigned and undated, places the summit in Sargent's purchase. In contrast, Bond's well-known 1853 map of the region is strictly topographical and does not identify property boundaries at all. So, two questions. Why is there disagreement between these two survey maps? And why would it matter in which purchase the summit is located? The answer to that question, or those questions, explains why the two surveys were made and what conflict each was intended to resolve. It also highlights the ways in which maps, as historical artifacts, provide visual help in wayfinding a path through legal, political, and economic situations, as well as for hiking in the past or today. The use of such maps, however, is an expression of Eurocentric concepts about physical space and how it should be organized and managed. The British colonists who emigrated to North America brought with them English land surveying techniques, and they used them to extend English power and control over existing indigenous lands and people. On the left, Native American concepts of mapping are depicted in a graphic image based on indigenous oral traditions by Amherst professor Lisa Brooks. The focus here on waterways, as you can see, the Connecticut here. The focus on waterways in this conceptual map shows a very different orientation to the land. In this image, the Saco River can be traced from the mountains all the way to the sea. In George Pittman's survey on the right, the White Mountain Road, or 10th New Hampshire Turnpike here, is shown, but not the Saco River, which it runs beside. The two rivers which are delineated over here are not named. Instead, as I noted before, the map focuses on dividing the entire area into large and small property boundaries identified by the names of those who claimed ownership. In an area such as the White Mountains, into which people were moving throughout the 18th and 19th century, property boundaries were the customary European foundation for establishing an orderly community, one with taxes, property values, and land which could be owned in perpetuity. From 1749, but especially after the settlement of the French and Indian War in 1763, colonial governor Benning Wentworth granted a series of townships along the original Wabanaki waterways, such as the Connecticut River going up north. The purpose was to secure the region for the English crown and to enrich himself and his cronies here in the seacoast region through the exploitation of natural resources, such as timber and fish for European markets. In this 1761 map here on the left by Joseph Blanchard and Samuel Langdon, it was dedicated up here to Charles Townsend, George III, Secretary at War, Privy Councillor, and member of the Board of Trade. The Board of Trade was concerned with timber resources in New Hampshire, in particular, the white pines, which were crucial to make masts for the British Navy. The detailed view on the right here, so here, this section over here, notes that along the Connecticut River north of the Ammonoosuc were the words choice white pines and good land. As it happened, Wentworth himself had been the procurer of timber for masts for the crown, and the location of white pines was of personal importance to him. Among the 1763 royal grants along the upper Connecticut River by Wentworth was one for the township of Lancaster, here, located northwest of the White Mountains. Each grant was similar, regardless of topography. They were meant to be 6 miles square and to encompass about 24,000 acres. On the back, or on the right-hand side, is the shape of the township of Lancaster, arranged along the curving banks of the Connecticut River. As the land had not been divided into lots, it was empty of lines. Above the map were the names of proprietors here. These were the people who were responsible for making the new settlement economically viable. On the left side, right here, just above the bow in the river, is the letter W, barely visible in this particular charter. Other copies of this map show that in the small box were the letters B, W, denoting 500 acres reserved for Wentworth himself. A BW reserve may be found on every township grant he issued. Furthermore, most of the proprietors, these people, were his friends, non-resident land speculators, not actual settlers. In the case of Lancaster, only David Page and his son, David Page Jr., actually took up residence in Lancaster. Within a few years of the 1783 Treaty of Paris settling the American Revolution, former colonists and new residents of a township like Lancaster here commissioned land surveys to document the allotments and to attract new settlers. The 1789 map above was surveyed by General Edwards Bucknam, a veteran of the Revolution and resident of the township, married to a daughter of proprietor David Page. The lot sizes shown reflect the division of land by value. So these narrow lots here along the riverways were the most valuable ones for farming. The larger lot and range divisions were 100 acres each, and generally were in less desirable farming area. Like most maps of Lancaster, the orientation here is to the south. The north is where we, the viewers, are located. This orientation is unusual and was most likely because the best place for making a map of a hilly terrain, such as in Lancaster, was from a ledge on the Vermont side of the river. Among the treasured town artifacts is Edward Bucknam's surveying compass. Here, the compass, the top of it is here. On the underside is the mount that would attach to a stick for field surveys. Around 1800, the new states, such as New Hampshire, began to map out their boundaries. Perhaps inspired by the 1801 publication by Massachusetts of its first state map, In 1803, the New Hampshire legislature authorized townships like Lancaster, again here on the left, to submit a new survey to be assembled into a state map. Yet again, Edwards Bucknam produced the survey, but this one featured primarily topographic and civic locations, but not property lots. So here, for example, are the 3 Martin Meadow Hills, and here is Martin Meadow Pond, the Connecticut River, of course, along here. Bucknam's final survey of Lancaster remains enshrined here in the state map that Philip Carrigan worked so hard to produce in 1816. However, the one area on the Carrigan map which was not surveyed in detail was this section, the White Mountains. Some 20 years after the opening of the Crawford Path to the summit of Mount Washington in 1819, bridle pathways were laid out to enable visitors from the base hotels, the Glen, the Crawford, and the Fabian houses to reach the summit on horseback. Thanks to the 1850 arrival of the Atlantic and St. Lawrence Railroad here in Gorham, opportunities for tourism to the summit of Mount Washington expanded, even on the steeper eastern flank of the mountains where the cursor is. The 1853 map here on the left by W.A. Goodwin in Tripp's White Mountain Guidebook shows the railroad's route from Portland here on the ocean all the way up to Gorham. From there, the map makes it look as if there's an easy road heading up into Pinkham Notch. And from there, it looks like a highway goes right up to the top of Mount Washington, leaving from the Bellows Farm right there. Just 5 years later, John B. Batchelder, made this print of a veritable traffic jam on the summit, a convergence of 3 bridle paths, here from the Crawford Path, here from the Glen, and over here from the White Mountain or Fabian's houses, converging at the top for a visit to the Tip Top and the Summit houses. Both Summit hotels were erected by entrepreneurs from Lancaster who paid rent for the privilege of operating their hotels. The result of all of this activity was that the ownership of the Summit had become desirable. Area entrepreneurs were interested in increasing the volume of business. In 1859, an owner of the Jackson Iron Manufacturing Company and of Sargent's Purchase, David Pingree of Salem, Massachusetts, took over the bankrupt Mount Washington Road Company. The reformed Mount Washington Summit Company completed the carriage road to the summit in 1861. Sylvester Marsh's Cog Railway, shown here by John B. Batchelder, was in full operation in 1869. So by 1870, the summit could be approached by a variety of hiking paths, 3 bridle paths, a carriage road, and the Cog Railway. The opportunities for economic benefit were considerable, and therefore property ownership, especially for those lands with questionable boundaries, could be contentious. When the state of New Hampshire began to offer its White Mountain lands for sale in the 1790s, the surveys done were not always completely accurate due to the difficulty of surveying mountainous terrain. Possibly as a result, most of the deeds listed in the Coos County Registry of Deeds for these White Mountain lands were quitclaim deeds, not warranty deeds. A quitclaim deed only conveys whatever title the seller has, as opposed to a warranty deed in which the seller guarantees that the title is good from time immemorial. This situation led to almost 200 years of controversy over the ownership of a number of White Mountain lands, including the summit of Mount Washington. One of the most prolonged and expensive conflicts was between Henry B. Wells and the Jackson Iron Manufacturing Company from 1860 until effectively 1894. In 1860, Wells filed a lawsuit to recover 12,000 acres and establish his title to the summit of Mount Washington. He claimed the summit by prior possession of his uncle, John Bellows, the owner of the farm, which we saw on the map earlier, the 1853 map, which became the site of the Glen House, and also his alleged inclusion in the 1835 deed to Thompson and Meserve's purchase. The defendants, Jackson Iron Manufacturing, claimed ownership as part of Sargent's purchase granted by the state in May 1832 and purchased by David Pingree in 1846. Both tracts of land had been granted and surveyed by James Willey, the New Hampshire Land Commissioner. These claims resulted in 3 New Hampshire Superior Court cases heard in the county courthouse at Lancaster, and legal disputes that lasted over a decade. The suits only ended in 1872 when the heirs of David Pingree bought out the Bellows and Wells interests in Thompson and Meserve's purchase. Initially, the identity of the surveyor of the unidentified survey map was suggested by Pittman's map here on the left, specifically the notations here. In the center is a line right here, heading north with an arrow at the top marked magnetic meridian. Below here are the words, quote, within the dotted red lines, Sargent's purchase as located by N. Barker by Sidereal Survey, 1854. A dot here clearly locates the summit of Mount Washington within Thompson and Meserve's purchase. Noah Barker had been hired by Jackson Iron Manufacturing to survey Sargent's purchase in 1853 and 1854. As Barker here was well-known surveyor and also land agent for the state of Maine, he produced many maps. Among them are the platting of the Aroostook County settlement townships right during the period before and after the Aroostook War with Great Britain, 1838 to 1839. George Pittman, here on the left, had been hired by John Bellows and Henry Bellows Wells to produce his survey in 1859. The 2 different placements of the summit of Mount Washington on Pittman's and the unidentified map suggest that the reason for Pittman's notation on his map about Barker's earlier survey was the fact that both men, both Barker and Pittman, testified in Wells v. Jackson Iron Manufacturing over the ownership of the summit. This fact seemed to point to Barker as the author of the unidentified map. The issue of Barker's use of sidereal or astronomical survey lines versus an exclusively magnetic survey was a point of contention between the 2 parties because it could result in the summit being under different ownership. During the trial, Barker, here on the left, testified to the validity of his 1854 survey with a disquisition so comprehensive that it was published separately in 1864 as a booklet, right, an essay on the cardinal points, being a collection of authorities in explanation of the terms, due north, due south, due east, due west, as applied to land surveying. It even included testimony from other noted survey experts. As recently as 1978, the essay was cited and reprinted as an example of the precise use of survey terminology. However, in spite of Barker's expertise and those of his friends, the New Hampshire court decided that since magnetic surveys had been the long accepted norm in the state, they would rule against the use of sidereal lines for just that reason. When the unidentified map was given to the New Hampshire Historical Society in 2018, it was attributed to Barker's 1854 survey, based on the dates at which specific locations were noted on the map. For example, the Crawford House, the Glen House over here, 1852, the Tip Top House, 1853. A March 2020 research trip to the Pingree Archive at the Phillips Library of the Peabody Essex Museum was scheduled to confirm Barker's work for Jackson Iron Manufacturing and to see how well the unidentified map compared to documented Barker maps in that collection. Although the coronavirus pandemic canceled the 2020 research trip, a future visit is still planned. In order to fully assess the significance of this map in the context of the conflict over the ownership of the Mount Washington Summit, it'll be helpful to take a few moments to examine exactly what is depicted here. The 24 by 16 by 5-inch manuscript map delineates in brown ink in a distinctive hand or handwriting a section of the White Mountains region oriented towards the north. Most of the lands are in Coos County with the exception of these over here, which are in Grafton. The townships of Whitefield, Carroll, Jefferson, Randolph, and Gorham are listed across the top. On the right side, beginning with Martin's Grant, Green's Grant, in which the Glen House is located, Pinkham's Grant, and then several notations and different boundary lines for the township of Jackson. These included two 18th century grants, R period W and T location, which would have been Rogers, Wentworth, and Treadwell's location, and Gridley's location here, with the words Small and Tuttle's Grant inserted into blank spaces on an area otherwise reserved for laid out range allotments. The central section going down clockwise or counterclockwise starts with Lowe and Burbank's Grant, Nash and Sawyer's location, Crawford's Purchase, Thompson and Meserve's Purchase, Crawford's Grant with the Crawford House, 1850, Chandler's Purchase, Cutt's Grant, Hart's location with the new Willie House located here on the Saco River, 1845, Hadley's Purchase, and Sargent's Purchase, and a tiny little lot right down here on the north bank of the Rocky Branch River marked D.M. Grant. Geographic features, as you can see, include the Ammonoosuc River, the Saco River, the Sawyer River, Nancy Brook, the Dry River coming up here, the Rocky Branch, the Ellis, and the Peabody Rivers. 3 summits are identified in Chandler's Purchase here, but only Mount Pleasant is named. And of course, Mount Washington and the Tip Top House are located within Sargent's Purchase. Here's the boundary line. 3 roads are noted with a dotted line for Pinkham's Turnpike here, along the Ellis and Peabody, a solid line for the New Hampshire 10th from Hart's location up to Nash and Sawyer's, and a small line here, which crosses, you can probably barely see it, crosses Pinkham's Turnpike, going from the Glen House across the river towards the summit of Mount Washington. Several boundary lines are worthy of note. 3 lines here between Thompson's and Meserve's and Sargent's purchases. A northward straight line here for Sargent's purchase. Boundaries for Cutz's grant here to there, and 2 lines, 1 and 2, for Jackson's western boundary. One is Jackson's new line, the other one is Lucy's line of 1826. While it has not yet been possible to examine Barker's maps in the Pingree Archive, one can examine some of his manuscript plat maps for Aroostook County because they've been digitized by the University of Maine. On the right is one that Jack Barker did in 1839 for Township number 9, Range 4. A non-expert, that would be me, examination of Barker's handwriting feels that it does not match very well what is on the unidentified survey map. For example, the capital letters T and S are not similar to the S and the T here. And the number 8 in the 1859 is not the same in the 8 here in 1826. As a result, further research into the authorship and perhaps purchase of the map, of the purpose of the unidentified map, remained warranted. In a 1989 article about the ownership of the Mount Washington summit, the authors, both academic scholars, who were the great-grandsons of the builder of the Tip Top House, Samuel Fitch Spalding, proposed another line of inquiry than the maps maker being Noah Barker. They reported on 2 special depositions taken in Lancaster, above here on the left, at the courthouse on July 9th, 1868, in Wells v. Jackson Iron Manufacturing. These were taken on behalf of the defendants, Jackson Iron Manufacturing, from 2 Lancaster, New Hampshire men. One, a surveyor, James Wingate Weeks, and the other, the company's lawyer, William Haywood. According to Weeks's deposition in 1867, he and Noah Barker were together employed for 4 weeks to resurvey the lots that were accepted, that is, not included, in Pingree's 1846 deed to Sargent's purchase. Meanwhile, in 1868, March, Haywood went to Concord to research the Secretary of State's land records, and he discovered an additional 400-acre 1821 grant by the state to Small and Tuttle that fell within the bounds of Sargent's purchase and should be accepted, as well as the specified lots. As a result, Weeks, along with Littleton surveyor Philip C. Wilkins, went back to the area, that would be on the Jackson side of the White Mountains, to verify that Small and Tuttle's grant was indeed a parcel located just to the southwest of Rogers, Wentworth, and Treadwell's location. Since Pingree's deed to Sargent's purchase in 1846 was a quitclaim deed, it was not warranted as valid from time immemorial. The purpose of the research by Haywood and the surveys undertaken by Barker, Weeks, and Wilkins were to provide Jackson Iron Manufacturing with accurate data on the purchase of Sargent's purchase. Then, on the 12th of June in 1868, Wilkins dropped a bombshell on the proceedings with a letter to Weeks. Based on the surveys that he was doing here on the west or Saco side of the mountains, he wondered if the state's 1810 grant to Thomas Cutts of Saco, Maine, might actually encroach on Sargent's grant or Sargent's purchase. Haywood returned to the Secretary of State's office and found the grant to Cutts, including its stipulated boundaries. Cutts' grant encompassed approximately 7,680 acres that ran from Hart's location up the Dry River Valley to the eastern side of the Saco below Crawford Notch. Haywood sent a copy of Cutts' grant from the state to Weeks, who was in the Mount Washington area at the time doing other surveys. Armed with the deed data, Weeks located the Dry River Valley in Crawford Notch and determined that more than 2,000 acres of said Cutts' grant lies within the bounds of Sargent's purchase. He quit the survey on the 3rd of July to hurry back to Lancaster and be deposed on the 9th by Hiram A. Fletcher, a law partner of both Haywood and William Burns, who was the lead trial counsel for Jackson Iron Manufacturing. On the same day, Haywood was deposed and stated that he had had no idea of the existence of Cutts' grant until Weeks's receipt of Wilkins's letter in June. He submitted an affidavit of the 1810 state grant to Cutts to the court. Weeks concluded his deposition with the statement that he would be returning to this area to verify and revise his survey of Sargent's purchase the following August in 1869. Since it now appeared likely that the unidentified map was in fact done by James W. Weeks, it seemed sensible to compare it to other work by him. Careful, if non-expert comparison of the map and Weeks's handwriting suggests that the map was indeed completed by him in 1869. James Wingate Weeks, on the left, was well qualified to have drawn the unidentified map. He was born on the farm on the right in Lancaster, which overlooked the entire north flank of the White Mountain Range, from Mount Wambeck here on the left, through the Presidentials, and all the way to the southeast to Mount Moosilauke. Like many farmers, Weeks had a gift for mechanics and surveying. In 1845, his skills caused him to be hired, along with several other people from the Lancaster area, to survey the U.S.-Canada boundary under the terms of the 1842 Webster-Ashburton Treaty. The others from Lancaster included his cousin, John Hubbard Spaulding, nephew of the builder of the Tip Top House, and his brother-in-law, Joel Hemingway. Weeks was selected because of his skills to make the preliminary surveys and sketches for the topographical maps all the way from New Hampshire to Lake Champlain. He already knew the area well from his survey of New Hampshire state lands up on Hall's Stream in Pittsburgh in 1844. The U.S.-Canada Boundary Survey Group spent from May until September on the survey, and Weeks produced the final topographical map submitted in September of 1845. During the subsequent years, he served as a railroad commissioner from 1848 to 53, precisely the period during which railroad expansion in Coos County included the arrival of the Atlantic and St. Lawrence Railroad, bringing visitors to Gorham and Mount Washington. In 1859, he had married Mary Elizabeth Burns, the unmarried sister of Lancaster lawyer William Burns. As a result, he was brother-in-law to Jackson Iron Manufacturing's lead lawyer in Coos County in the lawsuit versus Wells. If the map on the left was done by Weeks, there are several pieces of evidence to consider. First, the map clearly overlays Cutts' grant and the previous words, Dry River, you can see the C of cuts has been inserted between the I and the V of river. This is a graphic choice that most map makers would try to avoid. Second, thanks to the New Hampshire Historical Society librarian, Sarah Galligan, it has been possible to compare the handwriting on the map with a scrapbook kept by James W. Weeks, which is in the possession of the Society. Distinctive letters, such as the T here and the T here, the P here and the P here, and the H here and the H here, as well as the open-topped 8 here and here in 1826, appear to be identical. If this comparison is accurate, then research of Weeks's work in the Pingree archives should prove helpful corroboration. There is one other piece of evidence to connect the map to James Wingate Weeks. For several generations, it was owned by Martha Sinclair Weeks Sherill at her home in Lancaster, New Hampshire. It is likely that her father, Sinclair Weeks, gave it to her in the 1960s when she took over the old Moore McIntyre farmhouse on his Catbow farm. He had probably been given it by either his father, John Wingate Weeks, or his aunt, Emma Weeks Roberts. John and Emma were the nephew and niece of James Wingate Weeks. Emma lived in Lancaster and knew her uncle well. In addition, she became the keeper of many family historical artifacts, and the map may have been among them when she transferred the lot to her nephew Sinclair in the 1930s. Regardless of who made these survey maps, they provide wayfinding evidence for historians trying to understand how conflict over property boundaries could have and continues to have an impact over an area such as the White Mountains region. Even today, the ownership of the summit remains a subject for controversy. In 2018, the Office of the Attorney General for the state of New Hampshire rendered an interdepartment communication on, quote, the ownership history of the Mount Washington summit, unquote, to make it clear that the state is, quote, fee owner of almost all of the Mount Washington summit, unquote. The presence of that one word, almost, however, leaves the door open for future legal wrangles and perhaps new survey maps. I would like to give sincere thanks to the people listed below for their expertise and for their assistance with this project, and to thank each one of you for taking the time to listen. Thank you.
So I think our first question from Nancy is the U of Maine maps at the Osher Library at USM Portland. So I think she was talking about one of your maps that you had featured.
Well, those maps are done by the University of Maine, and they've created a digital commons. So they exist online. They may have taken them from a number of different places. It does not say in the digital commons exactly whether they're in Orono or whether they're in Portland, but it's entirely possible that they could be in that wonderful collection that's at the University of Southern Maine.
Wonderful, thank you.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, if it doesn't, Nancy, definitely let us know. All right, next question from Martha. Who do you think burned down the COAS Registry of Deeds?
Well, up here, practically everything went up in flames. So I'm not sure that there was anybody in particular, and certainly the town history does not point any fingers. So The good news was that after it, I mean, it was a frame building. In fact, it had been moved about 18 times, and it was up where the Verizon store is at the roundabout that marks the juncture of Route 2 and Route 3. So after it burned, they built a proper brick one with about 3 safes in it. But anybody who's done deed research up here knows that one spends a lot of time looking at B deeds, which means burnt. And those, they were dependent upon people bringing back to the courthouse to be copied. And copies are always a problem because inevitably, I do it myself. When you're transcribing, you make an error. So you have to really be careful with them.
So interesting.
Does that answer that question?
I think so.
Okay.
It's a good question from Marcia. Do you know of other White Mountain areas with similar issues?
Well, I would say offhand, Marcia, that Jackson probably had a lot of problems, because every time you redraw your boundaries like that, and one of the things I didn't get into here was that the southern terminus of Sargent's Purchase was that tiny little grant that was marked DM on the Weeks map. And DM was a woman named Dorcas Eastman Merrill. And that piece of property caused so much trouble, you can't even imagine. And so my guess is we could probably turn up a legion of problems. Certainly just looking at, going through the registry, since most of the deeds are quitclaim deeds, there are probably millions of problems.
To know. Let's see. Question from Carolyn. What was the significance? Oh, yeah. You ready? What was the significance of the discovery of the Cuts purchase to the Summit conflict?
So, Carolyn, that's a great question. And I should have mentioned that had the state not decided, the court not decided in favor of Sargent's Purchase, it could easily have, the property could easily have been located within Thompson's. The significance of the Cuts' purchase was that it supposedly, and this is the reason for the 3 lines, the 3 east-west lines, pushed the boundary of Sargent's Purchase northward, which meant that therefore the Summit was within Sargent's Purchase. So thank you for bringing that up.
That's what I was thinking, something like that. It kind of made it larger. Yeah.
Exactly. But 2,000 acres was a lot to go missing, wasn't it?
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, great question, Carolyn. Question from Adam. This is something I was curious about too. Were the Pittman map and the Weeks map ever laid side by side in the course of the dispute as you put them side by side?
That's a great question, Adam. And I think that one of the only way to find that out is to get to the Phillips Library, because they do the listing is extensive, a lot of papers. And my guess is that there was another map that Weeks did that was perhaps the final version, and that this was a draft, which is why it remained in his possession and perhaps ended up in Emma Weeks Roberts' possession. So I can't possibly know that until I go to see what's at the Phillips, which I will do at some point. Whether they were laid side by side, they certainly would have been considered, because Weeks's materials are listed, but just not specifically. Does that answer your question?
Getting a nod, so yes.
Okay, good.
Good. Yep. Maybe this can be our last question. This is kind of a follow-up research question. From Martha, she asked, have you gone to John Brown's papers at the State Historical Society? He owned RTW in Jackson.
So the John Brown that is in the deed is John Brown of Providence, Rhode Island. And so his papers are all in Providence, Rhode Island. They are the Brown archives, thank goodness. They're practically the only Brown industrial archives or Providence industrial archives that exist, that are really complete. And I have not looked at them, but I will when I'm back in Rhode Island again. I know he owned RTW because there's a deed at the Portsmouth Athenaeum.
There's a lot of things that we're looking forward to doing.
Right.
All right.
Well, anyway, I hope all of those of you who sat through this will go and look at the video that Rebecca has, because I think if you have questions about the early part, then the early sections were intended to kind of create a context for this type of map, as opposed to the wonderful maps that are in the exhibit, which are in a very different category.
Well, thank you, Becky. That's going to be such a great resource to have on our website, and we really appreciate that. It's one wonderful project that you've got here, and I love how it's intertwined with your family history. It's always interesting to me. I love it. Love it. So great.
Well, the one thing I will say is that map I looked at for about probably 40 years. Even my mother never knew exactly what the provenance was. So since I love maps, it was a fun project to try and see if I could figure out, but I did not expect it to come from James Wingate Weeks.
That's really great. Well, thank you so much, Becky, for your patience and for your research and for being willing to present this evening. Thank you so much for coming this evening, everybody.
Nice to see everybody.